Hey guys, so we are going to finish out reading A New Beginning. I've got my fabulous new reader, Deb, here, who is going to help me finish reading A New Beginning, and then we will be on to the next book, Nightscape. So we are going to begin with reading chapter 19 of A New Beginning.
What now? Maria asked when Max and Kyle got finished talking. We can't leave, Max said. It would be too suspicious. Well, it would look bad to the cops, but the cops are not the biggest problem in this town, Michael said. He was right, Liz knew. There were worse things than police here, worse things even than the special unit. There were rooms that weren't rooms and monsters. But in a few days, we will have to get out of town and put as much distance as we can between us and these aliens, Max said. What about Jessica, Dawn, who knows how many others, Kyle said. I don't think we can, Max said. He didn't allow himself to complete the thought out loud. Liz wanted to say that it wasn't true, that they could help. They could do something, find a way, but even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. Max and the others would likely lose any battle they fought. She had seen it happen in her vision of the future, in her vision of a different battle. What chance did they have against a huge ship full of monsters? But if that were true, what hope did Jessica have? What hope did Jimmy have? As if he were reading her mind, Max said, I'm sorry, but I don't think we can fix this. Liz caught Isabel's eyes and saw her own feelings mirrored there. Liz had caught glimpses of Jessica's pain, but Isabel had visited the girl's dreams. No one spoke much for the rest of the night. They got ready for bed and took their places with minimum conversation. They didn't sleep much either. Whenever Liz did close her eyes, she saw rooms that weren't rooms and monsters. It was a long night, but it passed, and Liz and Maria had to get ready for work. The others got ready as well. Without discussion, they headed together for the diner where Belle was waiting for them with concern written on her face. Are you kids all right? We heard about Dawn, she said when they entered. We're fine, Liz said. She was surprised to see Sam peek out from the kitchen. He didn't say anything, but he looked concerned. Belle sat them down and they told Belle and Sam the same story they had told Dan and the police. It was true to an extent. It's a shame. I hope they get the bastards before anyone else gets hurt, Sam said. Liz realized that that was the longest sentence she had heard Sam speak since they'd arrived. The group ate quickly and Kyle headed off to work while Max, Isabel, and Michael got ready to paint. You don't have to do that today, Belle said. We want to, Max said. Then to keep her from protesting, he added, it'll keep us busy. He didn't add that it would keep them near Liz and Maria. A few minutes later, Jimmy arrived, but he barely acknowledged them. He just took his place at the booth by the window and put his head down. The day at the diner moved slower than it ever had before. At first, Liz thought it was because of how she was feeling. Then she realized that it was because there were fewer customers and no women. It looked like people were not going out if they could avoid it. Things had gotten bad in Stonewall, very bad and desperate. Unfortunately, it looked like they weren't going to be getting better anytime soon. Kyle got to the garage early and decided to get right to work. If he finished early, he would be able to get even more time in on the van, and it seemed important to get the van running as fast as possible. He found that he didn't like the idea of running out on the town. People had helped them here, and now those people were scared and facing something they didn't understand. Better that they don't, he thought. If they knew what was really happening, they would be terrified and they would all run for their lives, like us. Max was right, though, he knew. What could they do against the force they had witnessed? Even Max's powers, incredible as they were, would be no more effective than Kyle's wrench against that technology. When he reached the garage, he was surprised to see the shop doors open already. Then something struck him about the shop doors. They were only partly open. In fact, they looked exactly as Kyle had left them the night before. Dan had said he would lock up, but clearly he hadn't. Kyle found his boss in the office, his head down on the desk. He was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. Hearing the door open, Dan woke up and raised his head. His eyes looked haunted and he looked exhausted. He also looked like he had aged 10 years. You okay, Dan? Kyle asked. Dan shrugged. I've known Dawn's father since I was a kid. He used to hang out with my brother. Last night, I told him his daughter is gone. I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry about Dawn and about your brother, Kyle said. His boss showed a tiny flash of surprise when Kyle mentioned his brother. This place is named after him. Our father opened it the year he was born. It looked like Dan wanted to talk. Kyle was too surprised to move for a long moment. Then he sat down on the office couch. Was the van out back his? He asked slowly. Dan nodded. Yes, he and my dad rescued it from being junked somewhere. He did the paint job himself. It looks like it was a hippie mobile, Kyle said. Dan actually made a slight smile at that. I guess he and his friends were hippies. They were also good kids. Ever heard of Woodstock? Well, yeah, my dad has the movie, Kyle joked. Did you go? Dan smiled and shook his head. We tried, made it as far as Indiana before the van broke down, he said. I know what that's like, Kyle said, smiling. Too bad for you guys, though. Dan shook his head. Not really. We camped out in the van for a week. Me, my brother, and 3 of his friends. That was the best trip of my life that summer. He drifted off for a moment. I was 13, hanging out with older kids. I had the time of my life. Tom, Dawn's father, was there. There was a long pause. Then Dan added, the next summer, my brother was gone. Kyle didn't know what to say. Dan clearly wanted to talk for the first time since Kyle had met him, but he didn't know if he should ask the obvious question. After more than a full minute of silence, Dan continued on his own. Johnny and Tom went to Vietnam together. Tom wanted to go. He thought he was saving the world. My brother wasn't as sure, but he didn't want anyone to get going in his place. I mean, he thought we were on the right side of that mess, but he would have rather stayed home. Dan took a deep breath and spoke the next part quickly. Johnny looked after Tom over there and a lot of other guys as well. He was a hero. Problem was his squad was caught in an ambush and there was no one to look after him. On the verge of tears, Dan held himself together, barely, Kyle thought. Sometimes you lose someone and, well, things are never the same. You are never the same. Kyle nodded. He thought of his mother. He knew something about that. He thought about Dawn. He had liked her. They had shared a connection, a small one, but a real one just the same. And now he was running out on Stonewall, running out on her. Well, tonight I told my brother's best friend that he's lost his daughter. Actually, I told him she was missing, but we know what that means in this town. His wife was there, so he said things were going to be all right, but I don't think they will be. I don't think Tom will be all right either. Dan shook his head. What kind of place is this? What kind of people would do this? Kyle had an answer to that, but he didn't think it would help Dan to hear it. In fact, whatever his boss's suspicions were, Kyle knew Dan would be better off if he never found out what was really going on in his town. Getting up, Kyle said, come on, you need some sleep. I can handle the cars in the shop for today. Dan nodded and allowed Kyle to lead him up and out of the office. Maybe just a little. Then I'll head over to Tom's to wait with him. Not much else to do. Kyle walked his boss around back and up to his house. At the door, Dan turned around and said, thanks, Kyle. Why don't you work on your van today? Take what you need from Johnny's van, get yours running, and get yourself and your friends out of Stonewall, okay? Dan's voice was stronger and clearer than it had been in the office. He clearly wanted Kyle to listen to him. Okay, he repeated. Sure, thanks, Kyle said, and turned to head back to the garage. In the shop, there was only one car waiting. He checked Dawn's book and saw that 4 cars were due in this morning, but he wondered if they would show. As he worked, Kyle thought about another group of kids traveling in a van more than 30 years before. They had shared the trip of their lives, but one of them would be dead a year later, leaving a brother who looked like he'd never really recovered, and a best friend who would lose his daughter. Tragedy, loss. Were they waiting for Kyle and his friends at the end of this trip? Or would they not even wait for the end? Kyle knew he couldn't even begin to answer those questions now, so he did the only thing he knew he could do. He worked. Max peeked into the diner for perhaps the 100th time since they had started working. Liz and Maria were fine. As he turned back to his work, he saw Michael staring into the front window as well. Michael looked away a moment later, and Max caught his eye as his friend did so. Michael shrugged, but neither one spoke. They didn't need to. They both knew what they were doing, keeping a close eye on the girls until they could get them all out of Stonewall. Max thought that the prospect of running out on this fight should have shamed him, but he found that it did not. I'm not running, his mind replied on his own. He was protecting Liz and the others. Once again, he wondered what kind of king he had been in his last life. What would that person think of what he was doing now? Had he loved Tess, his wife and betrayer, then as he loved Liz now? Would he have been willing to risk or sacrifice her? What about Michael or Isabel? Whoever he had been then, he knew he would not risk any of his friends now, and Liz least of all. Maybe that made him unfit to be a king. That was fine. He didn't want the job. And by all accounts, he had blown it for himself, his friends, and his whole planet back when he was a king anyway. For now, he would concentrate on protecting his piece of this world. If he couldn't save the planet, perhaps there was wise enough a ruler in him to save his friends and the girl he loved. Max tried to concentrate on the work in front of him. It was an effort, but he kept his hands busy. By the time the lunch crowd was done, he, Michael, and Isabel had managed to finish priming and painting the front of the diner. The work had not calmed him or given him any peace, but he figured it was better than sitting idle. Isabel had used her powers a bit in the end to spruce up the restaurant sign, but Max hadn't bothered to protest. There was no one on the street to see them. They were finished, but Max was reluctant to move on. When they were working on the side and the back, he wouldn't be able to watch Liz through the window. Looks like the lunch rush is over, Max said. Rush, Michael repeated. The restaurant had maybe 1/3 of its usual number of customers that day. That does it, Max said. He stepped back to look over the work. Let's clean up and get something to eat, Max said. Great job outside. Thank you, Belle said after they'd freshened up. Though she was trying to put on a smile, Max could tell that, like him and everyone else, she was really thinking of only one thing. Thank you, Max said. We used to paint with our dad back home. Belle nodded. I didn't expect you to do the sign too, she said. I found some matching paint in the basement, Isabel said, covering quickly. How did you get the neon to work? Belle asked. It hasn't come on in years. I fixed it, Michael said, jumping in. It was just a loose contact. Belle nodded politely, then turned serious. She looked from Max to Michael and said, You look after the girls. We will, Max said. These things happen in threes. They always take 3 girls at a time within about 24 hours. I know it sounds like crazy superstition, but every time it's happened, 3 girls have gone missing. Okay? Belle said. Okay, Max said. Since she was opening up, Max considered pumping Belle for information, but he decided against it. He needed to concentrate on getting his friends as far from Stonewall as possible. Belle nodded and walked off. Liz came over and greeted him with a thin smile. Then she kissed him, holding a little longer than usual. Belle brought them food, but didn't stay to eat with him. I'll be in the back with Sam, was all she said. Max understood he wouldn't leave Liz's side voluntarily. Kyle came in just as they sat down. Leaning into his friends, he said, The engine is in and back in one piece. I have more I could do, but if we have to go, the van will be ready tonight. Max nodded. At the same moment, Jimmy stirred and Max felt a pang of guilt. We can't help her, Max reminded himself. No one can, not now. The voice in his own head sounded so convincing that he almost believed it. Then we'll go tonight when you get off work, Max said to Liz and Maria. The others nodded. No one liked it, but they all silently agreed that they did not have a choice. A moment later, Max realized that they had fallen into their old habits. Max making decisions and the others going along. But this was a decision that Max knew was the only one he or any of them could make. After lunch, they started on the side of the diner. He didn't like not being able to see the girls, and he knew that Michael didn't either. Yet he knew it was irrational. There had never been an incident during daylight, and they would be on their way tonight. Too bad we won't be able to finish, Isabel said as they began. They would finish priming the side and rear of the diner today, and they would paint maybe half of the side wall before dinner. Belle and Sam had been good to us, she added. Max only nodded. Too bad, he said, knowing that the painting was the smallest part of it, but the only part they could talk about now. Chapter 20. Kyle finished the tune-up and decided to call it a day. There wasn't much more he could do, at least not before he had to meet his friends. The van's engine had new points and plugs, and he'd gotten all cylinders working. The brakes were new, and he'd replaced all the belts and hoses. Given more time, he would have done more with the suspension and taken a very close look at the carburetors. For that matter, he would have stripped both the engine and the carb and completely rebuilt them. But they were out of time. The van would get them hundreds of miles from Stonewall at least. That would have to be enough. He had done all he could. After he cleaned himself up, he headed into the office. Stepping inside, he reflexively looked for Dawn, scanning the small room for a moment before he realized the foolishness of the act. Still, her perfume hung in the room, and he imagined that he could feel her there. Yeah, I've done all I could, he thought. I'm a regular hero. Kyle did what he had to do quickly. Using the computer, he found out the going rate for his timing chain. Then he figured out what he had earned from Dan so far. It wasn't enough, but he knew that would be the case. So he took an envelope and put in the difference with the money Liz had left him. Then he pulled the van up to the pump and filled it with gas. Going back inside, he put the money for the gas into the envelope. Grabbing a pen, he jotted a quick note on the side of the envelope. Dan, thanks for everything. Here's the balance I owe you for the timing chain and some gas. It wasn't enough, Kyle realized, but he didn't even know how to begin to say the things he wanted to say. In the end, he just scrawled, I'm sorry, on the bottom of the note and signed his name. Taking the letter outside, he placed it in the garage mailbox, which was nailed to the wall outside the door. He quickly parked the van by the side of the garage, making sure that it was pointed toward the road. All they would have to do now was get into it and drive. Walking around back, Kyle took a last look in the room where he and his friends had stayed. He wondered what Dan would make of some of the improvements that Isabel had made. He wondered if Dan ever went inside that room. Johnny's room, his mind supplied. Kyle wasn't sure where that thought came from, but he was sure that he was right. The room had been Johnny's. Maybe a playroom or something when the boys were younger, then a teenage rec room when Johnny was older before he went to war. There was more than one ghost in the garage, Kyle realized. Collecting the towels and blankets, he carried them outside and shut the door behind him. Kyle was sure that Dan would not be back in the room. It was a shame, he thought. It was a good place. It had been a good place, and it must have meant something to Dan once. Now it was just a painful reminder. Kyle heard the door swing shut as he carried the linens to the office. Inside, he placed them on the couch and headed off to meet his friends. He spared a glance down the road where Gomer and Dawn had met with the aliens who had taken her. He remembered the dark cloud, the ship, and the feeling it had given him in his stomach. He wasn't looking forward to driving past that spot, but it couldn't be helped. They would leave it and all of Stonewall behind soon enough. As he headed down the empty Main Street, Kyle realized that he was sorry to be leaving Stonewall. They had gotten stuck here, and the town made Roswell look like New York City. But there it was. It didn't make sense. But Kyle realized that he had better stop trying to make sense of his life. It certainly hadn't gotten himself anywhere lately. Kyle reached the diner just as the sun was starting to set behind him. Through the window, he saw his friends milling around inside the empty diner. He found himself wondering if there had been any customers for the evening rush. There was something in the air again in Stonewall. Kyle had felt it yesterday before dawn was taken. The feeling was even stronger today. His friends greeted him as he walked in, their faces somber. He could see painting gear piled up near the kitchen door. Then he realized something was wrong. Jimmy wasn't at his place by the window. A moment later, Belle came out and Max approached her. I'm sorry we won't be able to finish the painting job, Max said. Finish? Belle said, confusion on her face. We have to be going, Liz said. Understanding spread across Belle's face. If I didn't live here, I'd be going too. In fact, I've been thinking that this might be a time to make that trip to the Grand Canyon Sam and I have always talked about. As for the painting, you kids did a beautiful job. Thanks, Belle said. The front is done and the side and back are scraped, patched, and primed. Sam can do most of the painting that's left with a roller and an extension pole, Max said apologetically. Don't worry about it. It looks like business is going to be slow for a while. We'll feed you kids and send you on your way, Belle said, turning back to the kitchen. Sam, last order of the night, she said. Kyle noticed that Maria was already in her street clothes. Liz, however, was still in uniform and was busy cleaning out the coffee machine. It's time, Parker, Maria said. I'll just do a few things while we wait for the food, Liz replied, moving on to fill a silverware holder. Kyle understood what she was doing. She was keeping busy and trying to do something nice for Belle because the woman had been good to her and because Liz felt like she was running out on her. A few minutes later, Belle started bringing out the food. She and Sam sat down with them to eat. I'm sorry that we can't give you a better send-off, Belle said. You've done plenty for us, Liz replied. We needed the jobs, and we wouldn't have eaten much in these last few days without you both. Belle shrugged. I'm glad you girls came. If you ever get tired of the road, you can always come back and work here. Then the group started cleaning up, a ritual that felt like a long habit, though they'd only been doing it for a few days. When they were finished, Belle handed Liz and Maria envelopes. The girls opened them, and Liz immediately said, This is too much. Belle shook her head. I think that's just right. Combined, this is probably more than the diner made today, Liz said. Think of it as a bonus for the painting and everything, Belle said. Liz was about to protest, but Belle shushed her, saying, Sam feels pretty strongly about it, and you don't want to get into an argument with him. Trust me. For one thing, it takes forever. Thanks, Liz said, tears forming in her eyes. Liz hugged Belle, then Maria, then Michael, Isabel, and Kyle. They each said thank you, and Belle looked outside and said, You kids better get going. It's starting to get dark out. Liz turned for the door when Max stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. Liz, he said, pointing at the waitressing uniform that she was still wearing. Oh, yeah, Liz said, smiling. I'll just be a second. Liz followed Belle into the kitchen. Grabbing her clothes, Liz watched Belle go to the open basement door and shout down, Sam, let's get a move on. Smiling, Liz went into the bathroom. She quickly took off her uniform and put on her street clothes. She stopped to check herself in the mirror when she heard a dull rumbling like the sound of a large truck barreling down the highway in the distance. The problem was that she wasn't near a highway. Then she felt a vibration in the floor. As soon as she felt it, she realized what was happening. From that moment on, what followed seemed to happen in slow motion. The sound and the rumbling seemed to be coming from the rear of the diner, in the alley behind the kitchen area where Liz was herself. Belle was her first thought. She's back there. With agonizing slowness, she reached for the doorknob of the bathroom and opened it. The rumbling was now a roar in her head. The light in the kitchen was dimming, but she could still see the open basement door. She also saw that the back door was open. Belle must be outside, probably taking out the garbage. She found her voice and called out, Belle! There was no answer, but Liz thought she saw a figure silhouetted outside. It was hard to tell because the world went almost completely dark. No, it hasn't gone dark, Liz realized. A dark cloud was covering it somehow. It was a cloud you couldn't touch or feel, but it somehow covered light in blackness. No, Liz could feel the cloud. She felt it right in her stomach in a twisting mass. Don't look, she thought, and willed her eyes shut. She felt only slightly better. Whatever that cloud was, it was penetrating even her closed eyes. She felt queasy and her legs were rubbery under her. She pushed all that aside. Belle was in trouble, and she didn't need her gift to see Belle's future unless she did something. Liz didn't know what she could do, but she wouldn't stand here while whatever was out there took Belle. Before she could think, Liz found herself running toward the back door. Her hip banged into a counter and she opened her eyes. It didn't help. The dark cloud was everywhere and she couldn't make out anything. Using her hands, she felt her way. Then there was a strangled cry. Liz was sure it was Belle. Belle, hang on, Liz said. Then there was a voice calling her name. Liz! It was Max's voice. Max would help. He would know what to do. To the alley diner. Liz! Max called again. It was hard to judge where his voice was coming from. Max might be right next to her or on the other side of the diner. She couldn't wait and stepped out into the alley, feeling her way through the night air even though she couldn't see anything. Her stomach was doing flip-flops and she had to struggle not to retch. Belle, a voice called out. It was Sam's and he sounded desperate. Belle, Liz called, reaching out with her hands. Nothing but air, then something. But it wasn't Belle. Liz grabbed hold of something and then suddenly realized that something was grabbing her back. It was hard but alive, and Liz was immediately certain that it wasn't human. It felt like a claw and pulled Liz forward in a single sharp movement. Liz felt a slight pressure on her neck and plunged into the darkness.
Chapter 21. It took Max an instant to place the sound. By the time the floor started to shake, he was already on his feet. He got up so quickly that his feet got tangled in the chair. He would have fallen if Michael had not been there, holding onto his shoulder. Liz, he said, voicing his thought. She had gone into the back. Max headed for the kitchen at a run as the diner went dark. He banged into a table and heard Michael and Kyle doing the same. Close your eyes, he heard Kyle say. He did so immediately. It helped relieve the nausea and the lightness in his head. A little. It seemed to take forever to reach the back of the diner. Then Max's hand found the door to the kitchen and pushed it open. Michael and Kyle were right behind him, he knew, when he pushed on. He felt the energy crackling in his hands as he ran, fear for Liz summoning it. He would make whoever was doing this regret they had ever come to Stonewall, if he could see them long enough to strike at them. The ground was shaking so hard that Max found he had trouble keeping to his feet. Still, he felt his way back. There were screams, and the rumbling all around them changed pitch. Something was happening. No, Max said. Then there was an odd whooshing sound, and the dark cloud lifted. Max opened his eyes, trying to readjust to the light in the alley. By the time his vision returned, he realized that the rumbling had stopped. In fact, the alley was deathly quiet, and Liz was gone. Belle! A frantic voice called out next to him. It was Sam. He had a desperate look on his face. Max knew exactly how he felt. Did they take her? Sam said, his eyes wild. Michael put a hand on the man's shoulder, and Max knew what he had to do. Reaching out, he cupped his hand around the back of Sam's neck and concentrated. Slowly, the man crumbled to the floor. What did you do, Max? Michael said. Put him to sleep for a while, I think, Max said. Leaning down, he touched the man's forehead. Hey, he's all right, Max said. Liz, Maria said from behind him. Max shut out everything and concentrated on the problem at hand. Michael, help me with him. Together they half carried, half dragged Sam into the diner and drew the curtains. Maybe we could call someone. Maybe we should call someone, Maria suggested as Max and Michael drew all the blinds. No police. We don't call anyone, Max said. There was no one to call. There was no one who could help them. No one who could do what he had to do now. Isabel, I need to connect with Liz. Asleep or awake, I need to know where she is. Now, Max said, his voice tight and controlled. Nothing like the swirling mass of grief and fear inside him. I'll try, Isabel said. No, don't try. Do it, like you did with me when I was in the White Room. Direct contact, Max said. Isabel nodded and sat down in a chair. She closed her eyes and fell immediately and deeply into a trance. Without asking, Max knew that Isabel was pushing the limits of her abilities. A few moments later, Isabel came out of it gasping for breath. I know where she is, Isabel said, taking deep breaths. She's not in the big room. She isn't on a table. Yet. Belle is there and someone else, Isabel said. Dawn? Kyle asked. I think so, Isabel said. Where? Max asked. Isabel pushed her way out of the diner and scanned the road in the distance. She could see outside for a second. There was a window or a screen. Searching in the moonlight, Isabel pointed to a hill a mile or so in the distance. There, behind that hill, Max turned to Kyle. I need the keys to the van, he said. Max, you can't, Isabel said. It's too dangerous. You said it yourself. Even our powers. I'm going, Max said, his tone inviting no argument. Then we all go, Maria said. Max heard steel in her voice, too. He understood. Liz was her best friend. No, Michael shouted. Absolutely not. She's my friend, Maria said defiantly. Don't you get it? They only take women, Michael replied. So you're saying that I can't help save Liz because I'm a girl? Maria said, the challenge clear in her voice. Yes, in this instance, you can't go because you are a girl, Michael replied. He was clearly struggling to keep in control. Max felt the seconds slipping away. If the ship left the planet or even the immediate area, they would never find it, and he would never see Liz again. You unbelievable sexist, Maria began, but stopped herself. You need to stay, Isabel, and keep an eye on Maria, Max said. It won't be safe for either of you where we're going. Max didn't make it an order. He had given up that right. However, he would stop them if they tried to come. But Isabel only nodded, and then she gave Max a quick hug. Come back, Max, and bring Liz with you, Maria said. Nodding, Max turned to go. Stay with them, Kyle said. I'm going, Kyle said. We don't have time for this, Max said. It's too dangerous. I know what's going on here, Max. Do you really think your chances out there are much better than mine? He has a point, Max, Michael said. I can't allow it, Max said. Well, maybe, but you're not the king and not the boss of me, Kyle said. Kyle was right, but Max didn't want another person's life on his conscience. He reached out his hand. To his surprise, Kyle acted quickly. He leaned into Max for a moment and grabbed the keys from Max's other hand. Then he twisted his body away from Max. A second later, he was holding the car keys. Nice try, Max, but I'm going. In fact, I'll drive, Kyle said. Max felt the time ticking away. Okay, he said, starting down the street. The boys were immediately at a run and reached the van quickly. Kyle jumped in the driver's seat while Max and Michael jumped through the side door. Before they were even sitting, Kyle hit the gas and the van shot forward. Even in a super alert and focused state, Max realized that the van was running smoother than it had since they'd gotten it. It also had more pickup, he noted as Kyle accelerated quickly. They tore down the empty road past the place where Dawn had been taken. There, Max said, pointing to the tall hill to their left. Immediately, Kyle pulled off the road and onto the open field. The van bumped its way through the field, bouncing up and down. Kyle had to slow down and maintain control, and Max felt precarious seconds ticking away. Then, when they were maybe 200 yards from the foot of the hill, there was a loud snap from up front, and the van veered sharply to the left and came to a stop. Kyle winced when he heard the snap. Something had broken in the front end. He knew it didn't matter now. The van couldn't take them any farther on tonight's trip. If they succeeded in what they had to do, they would fix it or replace it. If they failed in what they had to do, they wouldn't be needing transportation anymore. It would be cheerfully provided by some mean-tempered aliens, and the trip would be one way. Van's toast, Kyle announced as he opened the door. Almost as soon as they came to a stop, the three boys had jumped out of the vehicle almost simultaneously. Without a word, they started running for the hill at full speed. They were there quickly, and Kyle was sure that he had just beaten every sprinting time he had ever made on the football team. They started climbing the hill and were at the top in less than a minute. Looking down, Kyle saw the ship. There was no black cloud, no running lights, just a large cylinder sitting on some sort of landing struts in the rocky field. It looked smaller on the ground, and Kyle figured it was maybe 60 yards across. It also looked like a lot less menacing, but that was a dangerous illusion, he realized. They don't look so tough now, Michael said, echoing Kyle's thoughts. We have to move quickly. Once they're in the air, we'll never see Liz again, Max said. What's the plan, Max? Michael asked. No plan. We just go in and hit them with whatever we can, and we go from there, Max said. Looks like it's about to go down on the street, Michael said, and we're not leaving until it's finished, Kyle added. Michael gave Kyle a thin smile, but Kyle could see Michael's face settling into what? His friend had had the same look during the confrontation with Gomer. Michael looked dangerous, and so did Max. Kyle felt a rush of optimism and decided that he wouldn't want to be those aliens in the ship right now. Looks like they haven't turned on the cloaking device, Michael said. The what? Kyle said. Whatever it is that creates the black cloud, Michael said. It might be a defensive weapon or just a byproduct of their energy source, Max said. Let's hope we'll get close enough to do some damage before they turn it on. Let's go, Max said. The boys moved quietly, but quickly down the other side of the rocky hill. The ship was less than a football field's length from the bottom. Kyle's heart was hammering in his chest, but not in fear. He remembered the feeling from the big games of his high school football career. He was flipping the switch. That was what they called it on the team. Flipping the switch was the change that came over you when you played the game. Athleticism could only get you so far in the field. To win, you had to turn a corner. You had to get aggressive. Kyle felt pretty aggressive right now. He felt like he was ready for anything. Come on, Max said. Let's get as close as we can without giving ourselves away. The trio had taken less than 10 steps when Kyle heard a click from up ahead. Kyle kept moving until Max's hand went up and he said, "Stop." Instinctively, Kyle went as quiet as possible. Something was ahead of them, and Max was pointing to it. Then there was that sound, a high-pitched click, followed by another one. Kyle couldn't place the sound, and he realized he didn't like it. It sounded unnatural. It took Kyle's eyes a moment to focus in the moonlight. Then he saw a figure up ahead. It was tall, taller than Michael, maybe 7 feet in height. And though it was roughly the shape of a person, Kyle immediately knew that what he was looking at was no person. He was looking at a monster, something out of a nightmare that Isabel and a girl named Jessica had shared. The color of its reptilian-looking skin was hard to make out in the moonlight, but Isabel called it brown, and Kyle thought that was probably right. The shape of the head was the creepiest thing about it. The mouth was wide, but the head was relatively narrow at the top, and it came to a rough point in the back of the creature's skull. Yellow eyes were hard to look at. They had a malicious intelligence, and they were looking right at the 3 boys. "He sees us," Max whispered. "Why isn't he doing anything?" Michael wondered aloud. "I don't think he takes us very seriously," Max replied. Michael lifted his hand. "Well, he could take this seriously." "No," Kyle whispered back. "No fireworks or energy balls or whatever it is that you guys do. You'll sound whatever kind of alarms they have. Let me take him the old-fashioned way. It'll be quick and quiet." Max turned his head in surprise. "I've taken down 260-pound defensive linemen on the field," Kyle said. "If I get into trouble, I'll call you and you can come back for me. Come on, we're losing time." As if to punctuate Kyle's comment, the ship began to hum. Then a few of the exterior lights switched on. If the ship took off, Max studied him for a moment. "Okay, he's yours." Turning to Michael, Max said, "We'll circle around him and meet up at the center of the ship." Kyle nodded and took a step towards the creature. "Man, are you ugly," he whispered to himself. Freshman year, the coach had decided that all the players take a karate course offered by the physical ed department for discipline. Like most of the guys on the squad, Kyle had not taken it very seriously. But there was one thing the instructor had said that Kyle had remembered. He had been showing them how to crack boards with their hands. "Before you strike, see your hand breaking the board. If you can't see it, you'll never be able to do it," he had said. This is just like all county championships. Now there were some scary guys, Kyle thought. Kyle noticed the creature eyeing him with interest. When it tilted its head, Kyle got the distinct impression that it was amused by him and his friends. There was a sound of footsteps from the direction that Max and Michael had gone. The creature's head turned quickly and scanned the area. It fixed on Max and Michael. That was it. Kyle started running. He was less than 50 yards from the alien, and he covered the ground quickly. As he got closer, he saw that the creature was fairly bulky up top, broad in the chest area. Its legs and lower body were thinner. Kyle knew what to do now. When he was only yards from the alien, he got himself ready and fought back the revulsion he felt. "Massive upper body means a higher center of gravity," he heard the coach say in his head. "In that case, hit them low," the voice continued. At the last second, he threw himself forward at the creature's lower thigh. He hit the creature with his shoulder. The creature didn't have time to move. The alien obviously didn't think humans posed it a physical threat. Then again, maybe he knows something we don't, Kyle thought, as he took out his opponent with the best hit and wrap move of his post-football career. Like he learned on the team, he wrapped his arms around the alien's rough skin so it couldn't throw him off. The rest was physics. The alien was going down. He met with much less resistance than he expected. The creature immediately fell back, and Kyle realized that it was lighter than it looked. Though he couldn't be sure, Kyle thought he heard a solid snap as he made contact. Kyle and the creature went down together in a heap. As soon as they hit the ground, he let go and scrambled to put some distance between himself and the alien as he tried to get to his feet at the same time. Something grabbed his foot. It got me with its claw, Kyle thought, fighting down panic. Kyle felt himself getting pulled closer to the creature, and all he could think about was its wide mouth full of teeth. As he slid closer, Kyle heard a series of loud clicks from the alien. They went right through him and brought the panda closer to the surface. While he squirmed and tried to get away, Kyle felt the second claw trying to find purchase on his body. Caught, his mind cried out. Out of instinct, he reared up with one foot and slammed it where he thought the creature's head would be. He made contact with something and felt the second claw jab him in the stomach. He brought his foot down again, and this time he heard a satisfying thud and knew he had landed a very solid blow. Kyle had hurt him. Suddenly the creature released him and, as far as Kyle could tell, went still. He wasn't sure because he didn't turn around until he'd scrambled several feet away. When he did turn around, he saw the alien lying in a heap. It didn't move, and he had stopped making its horrible sounds. Got him, Kyle realized. He had won one for his friends and for himself. A quick smile formed on his lips, but Kyle knew they were a long way from done. He had to get to Max and Michael. Kyle pushed off the ground and found that he couldn't get up. There was an odd pressure in his abdomen. Kyle's hand went to the spot and came up wet. What? He thought, looking down at his hand. It was wet with his blood. As the haze of his adrenaline rush started to fade, Kyle realized that it wasn't pressure he was feeling in his stomach. It was pain. The creature had stabbed him with his claw when they were struggling. It had gotten him pretty good, too, judging by the fire in his abdomen now. Kyle tried again to get to his knees and found that he couldn't. A moment later, he was on his back, pressing his wound with one hand. Kyle, are you okay? A voice called out. It was Max. When Kyle spoke, he thought his voice was remarkably strong. Yeah, I took him down, but he clipped me good. I'll have to sit out the rest of the game. You sure you're okay? Max said. Yeah, go. Do what you have to do, Kyle said. He spoke the last sentence quickly as the pain got worse. Kyle knew that Max would stop to heal him if he knew that Kyle was hurt. They couldn't afford the time now. Liz's life depended on him striking hard and fast. If they succeeded, there would be plenty of time for Max to help them when they were done, and Liz was safe. Stay where you are, Max said. We'll be back for you. No problem, Kyle thought. I'm not going anywhere. Despite the pressure he's putting on the wound, Kyle felt the blood seeping from it. He saw the blood spreading over his shirt and began to drip down to the ground. Suddenly he knew he was a long way from all right. Well, the important thing was that Max thought he was okay. Now he and Michael could finish what the three of them had started. Kyle was glad he had been able to help, even if it was just to take down one of the bad guys. He shivered. That was new. Had it gotten colder all of a sudden? Kyle figured it had. He noticed something else. The pain wasn't as bad now. The waves were gone, and he felt only a dull ache now. He shivered again. When did it get so cold? Chapter 22. Doesn't look like there are any more guards, Michael said. I'm not sure he was a guard. He didn't even have any weapons, Max said. Either way, it looks like they are all inside, Michael said. They crept closer to the ship. A few more steps, then a few more. They moved as silently as they could. Now they were less than 20 yards from the ship. Details were clearer. Max could see the landing struts and a single ramp that led up to some kind of hatch or doorway. How is that plane coming along, Maxwell? Michael said. Slowly, Max replied, considering the scene carefully. We have no idea how many of the aliens are around or inside. We don't know what kind of weapons the ship has, and for all we know, they're watching us inside on the big screen now and laughing, Max said. Well, sure, it sounds bad when you put it like that, Michael said. I guess that leaves us with only one choice. The front door, Max said. On 3, Michael said. 1, Max said. 3, Michael began, but he was interrupted by a loud, high-pitched clicking that suddenly filled the night. Max's eyes searched the ship for signs of movement. An instant later, he saw a spot near the top begin to glow. Reacting instinctively, Max threw up his hand, and two things happened nearly simultaneously. A green barrier appeared in front of Max and Michael, and a bolt of something tore out from the ship toward them. It struck the barrier Max had created with tremendous force. The barrier held at first, but the blast of whatever it was still there, an angry ball of swirling white energy pressing itself against the barrier. The blast was pushing into the barrier, closer to Max and Michael. In seconds, it would be over for them. No, not just for them, for Liz, too. No, Max said, pushing forward with his hand, except that Max knew that it wasn't his hand that was doing the real work. Somewhere in his mind, in his cerebral cortex, powerful forces were at play. When Max pushed, he pushed with his whole being. The green shield crackled with energy and flew back outward. The blast that the ship had sent to them went flying back towards its point of origin. It struck the ship in a shower of sparks that blinded Max for a moment. It also shook the ground. Before his vision cleared, he said 3 and started running. He sensed Michael next to him as a new sound emerged from the ship. No, not a new sound, a familiar one. It started to grow darker. Max felt a queasy sensation beginning in the stomach and heard Michael say, "No way, not now." Before the darkness became total, Michael lifted up his hand and fired off a burst of his own. This one hit the ship nearly dead center and shook it visibly. Instantly, the dark cloud dissipated. "What did you do?" Max asked. "Not sure, but it looks like it worked pretty well," Michael said. They were at the foot of the ramp now. There was a light inside the ship, and Max ran toward it. Liz is in there, he thought. An instant later, 2 figures appeared at the top of the ramp. They were pointing something down at Max and Michael. Even as that thought registered, a blast from Michael leaped out at them and tossed them very hard back into the ship. Max realized that Michael had taken the lead and was barreling up the ramp just ahead of him. Well, he's better at this part than I am, Max thought. He had an instant to wonder where that thought had come from, and then they were inside the ship, standing on a landing with one door on either side of them. The ship was filled with loud clicking sounds, which Max guessed was some sort of automated alarm. Something was wrong. The floor was shaking beneath his feet. He and Michael must have hit the ship pretty hard. Good, he thought. An alien appeared from a door that slid open. Max cursed to himself. He had held out a slim hope that there might only be the 3 they had seen so far. Clearly there was more. This one was similar to the one Kyle had taken down. Actually, it looked identical. Michael blasted him back the way he came. That way, Max said, pointing to the hallway the alien had emerged from. They stopped inside and found nothing, just 30 or 40 feet of hallway. What now? Michael said. Max thought for a moment. The ship was shaking now. Something was wrong with it. Whatever they did, they needed to do it fast. No time, no time, no time. There were sounds of movement from inside the ship. Max did the only thing he could think of. "Liz!" he called out. He did it again. Michael called out as well. "Shh," he said, holding up his hand. Nothing. They called for her again. "Max," a voice said. There it was, faint, but he had heard it. A look at Michael's face told him it wasn't his imagination. "Max," the voice said, louder this time. It was coming from back behind the door. Max led them back to the small landing they had first reached when they entered the ship. He heard Liz again, louder this time. Then he realized where they were. They were in the dead center of the ship. The landing obviously connected 2 main hallways that ran the length of the vessel. Max started for the door on the opposite door, the one that would lead him to Liz. The door opened, but Michael's hand on his shoulder pulled him aside before he could step through. "Let me check it out," Michael said. Stepping through, Max was an instant behind him, faster than he could have ever reached. Michael identified and blasted 2 aliens that were waiting for them. "Max," Liz called out again. She sounded much closer now. Max ran down the hallway. He and Michael checked doorways together and only once saw an alien, whom Michael quickly dispatched. Then they tried another door and saw 3 people inside against a wall. Liz was there, Max realized, feeling a rush of relief. She was standing up attached to the wall with some sort of straps or bands. Next to her were Belle and Dawn. Both of them looked unconscious. Liz seemed half out of it herself, but she was fighting. She had retained enough consciousness to see where they were and had told Isabel. A rush of love for her overwhelmed him, but he pushed it aside. He still had plenty of work to do. Max didn't bother to scan the room. He sensed Michael was doing it, and since he didn't hear any blasts, he assumed it was clear. Rushing to Liz, he waved his hands, and the bands around her flew off. She fell into his arms. Putting her down on the floor, he ran his hand over her whole body. She seemed okay, except drugged. They'd given her something. It was affecting her, keeping her docile. Summoning his power, he placed his hand on her head and felt his energy flow into her. Immediately her eyes cleared and she looked up at him. Holding his hand up to tell her to be still, Max ran his other glowing hand over her body, clearing it of the drug. An instant later, Liz's arms were around him and he was pulling her up. "We're in the ship," he said. Liz nodded. "I told Isabel where it was." "Can you walk?" he asked. "I'm okay," she said, taking a step to make sure. "Good. We'll have to carry them," Max said, pointing to Belle and Dawn. Michael had removed their bands and quickly threw Dawn over her shoulder. Max did the same to Belle, and they headed down the hallway, making for the landing of the ramp. Michael was in front, and Max could see that he was watching carefully for aliens. Thankfully, none appeared. Then they were on the landing. The ramp was in front of them. Michael headed down first. Max almost stumbled when the ship shook, and the ramp nearly threw him. Liz's hand was on him, and he kept his balance. Finally, they were on the ground. 10 feet, 20, 30. Michael stopped and put Dawn down. Max did the same with Belle. He took a quick look at them and saw that they were both breathing. That done, he had only one thought. He wanted to put his arms around. "Max, we have to go back," Liz said. "What?" he said. "Back in there? We just got out. Miraculously, in one piece," Michael said. "There are others in there. I heard them. screaming, Liz said. We can't leave them. Max thought about Isabel's dream-walking experience and Liz's vision. Whatever the aliens were doing to the people they took, it was awful. He looked at the ship. It was shaking visibly, and inside there were girls who were imprisoned and being experimented on. Max had some experience with that. Liz, it's too late, Michael said. We'll go, Max said. Well, what? Michael said, shocked. But Max was already running back to the ship, and he knew Michael was just behind him. By the time he reached the ramp, Michael was ahead of him, muttering, but leading the way. Since they had searched the hallway that was to the right of the landing looking for Liz, this time they turned left. There was no aliens in the hallway, at least none that were moving. Quickly they tried doors. Max saw equipment he didn't recognize, a seemingly empty room, but no people or aliens for that matter. Finally, at the end of the hall, they saw a single large room. Scanning it quickly, Max saw a long row of tables like the ones Isabel had described from Jessica's dream. 10 tables, no 12, and 3 of them were occupied. Max ran over to look at the closest one. Once he stepped next to the bed, something happened. The rest of the ship seemed to disappear around him. He could see the floor and ceiling going on in all directions, seemingly forever. There appeared to be no walls. Rooms that aren't rooms. Michael? Max called. I'm here. I see it too. Weird, Michael said. Max stepped away from the table and the room took on its normal appearance. It's an illusion, he realized. Maybe it keeps them from trying to get away, Michael said. Max nodded and said, let's get them out of here. Max, I don't think this one. Max, this girl is dead, Michael said, pain in his voice. Dead. Rage boiled up in Max. These creatures had taken an innocent girl, experimented on her, and killed her. They had also taken Liz, and that fate had been waiting for her. There were straps holding the girl in front of him to the table. Max used his powers to break them and took her into his arms. He gently put her on his shoulder and stepped away from the bed. He was relieved when the illusion was broken, and the room appeared normal finally. I've got Jessica, Michael said. Can we go now? Max nodded and they headed into the hallway. The ship rocked violently under their feet for a moment, then it moved again. Did you feel that? Michael asked. Yes, Max said, a feeling of dread coming over him. The ship is moving, Max said, voicing Max's worst fears. He and Michael raced through the ship. Max had a second to note through the rough texture of the metal wall and floor. Otherwise, the alien vessel was sparse except for a few lights, panels, and screens of different shapes. It was a real spaceship. Under different circumstances, he knew that he and Liz would love to explore it. Max lurched forward and pushed all other thoughts from his head. He knew that if he didn't hurry, he would have plenty of time to study the ship from the inside. It's not cold out, Kyle realized. The growing puddle next to him told him that much. This cold he was feeling came from inside. On the plus side, the worst of the shivers seemed to be over, and he barely felt the hole in his abdomen that was causing all the trouble. He had stopped pressing on his wound, not because he didn't care anymore, but because his hands would no longer obey his commands. In the beginning, he had heard noises and seen flashes of light. That was when he had still been able to lift his head. There had been one great moment when he had heard a bright ball of something strike the ship and rock it hard. It had looked like Michael's work. Max and Michael had hurt them. Good, he thought. Kyle had always had a problem with bullies, and he sensed that his creatures were the worst kind. Whatever their motives, whatever their reasons for coming trillions and trillions of miles, they were just bullies, like the ones he had seen growing up. But sometimes bullies picked out the wrong kid and got a surprise. When he heard a loud rumble coming from the ship, he decided that his friends were giving him that surprise. He would have smiled if the effort had not been too great. He thought of his dad. He wished he could see him again, but at least he'd been able to say goodbye. It was more than he had been able to have with his mother. Still, he let them both go. Liz, Max, Maria, Michael. One by one, he let his friends go. Isabel was last and hardest, but he let her go in the end. Other friends, other times. Girls he had known. Dawn, who had liked him and smelled very nice. Vicky Delaney, with whom he had spent an evening in the back of a pickup. He let them all go. His world became very simple and very small. He had thought the middle path was difficult to walk, but it would take great effort for him to find it, but now he knew it was as easy as letting go. In the end, there was only his breathing. He realized he probably should have stopped making the effort, but old habits. In the end, life is astonishingly simple. Small breaths, in, out. Soon, he knew he would have to let that go too. Chapter 23.
Liz felt her strength come back as she watched the alien ship. Max had healed her, but she still felt weak. As the minutes ticked by, she felt her heart thundering in her chest. I'm sorry about your friend, Jimmy had said. Was it Max whom Jimmy had seen? Was her vision coming true just earlier than she had expected? She had seen Max fight. He had been brave and had stood strong, and he had died. Maybe her vision had become mixed with her dream. Maybe she had just seen this moment. And I sent him back inside, Liz thought. The ship shuddered a few times, and there were noises from within. Could he already be? No, when he had died before, she had felt it. If anything happened to him now, she knew she would feel it. That told her he was still alive, but for how long? The ship shook again. No, it didn't shake, it moved. Liz was on her feet, blood suddenly pounding in her veins. The ship had lifted several feet off the ground and was wobbling in the air. She had seen it move. The ship had moved before. It could move quickly, and any second now she knew it could disappear. Then it might not matter if Max was alive or not. Either way, he would be gone, and the aliens would have him. No, her mind screamed. He had come for her, and he and Michael had saved her. Max had fought in the vision, though it had not been enough. He had still died. She had stood there helplessly and watched him die. She had stood there, helpless. That was what had bothered her about the dream. She had watched it all, but she was unable to help, like now. Except she wasn't helpless, and Max was not fighting by himself. She threw her hand forward and hit the ship hard. It was the same force that had blown out the windshield of the van, but many, many times stronger, Liz realized. The ship shuddered at the impact and drifted across the field for several seconds. Then it started moving up 10 feet, 20, then 50, more. No, Liz screamed, reaching out her hand. She willed the ship to stop moving. To her surprise, it did, and then it started drifting back down to the ground. The ship made an ugly humming sound, and Liz felt herself straining at the effort. The strain wasn't physical, but it was just as real. Then it was slipping. The ship stopped its descent maybe 20 feet from the ground. Liz concentrated her mind and her will to the task. She managed to hold the ship. There was movement in the door, then on the ramp. It was Max and Michael, she was sure. But the boys were struggling. They were each carrying something, someone. They were close, but it was still too high. With a final burst of effort, she wheeled the ship down. It lurched to the ground and touched for just an instant. But that instant was enough. Max and Michael jumped clear. Liz lost her hold on the ship, and it shot into the air with the same speed it had moved the night before, except this time it was racing straight up. She quickly lost track of the vessel in the night sky. Max, she screamed, racing toward him. When she reached them, Max and Michael looked okay. In fact, they looked great. They were both carrying the weight of a person on their backs, but they were standing strong. Max smiled at her, and she led the boys back to where Dawn and Belle were lying. Max and Michael put the two others next to them. Jessica, Liz said, oh my God, you found her. Liz felt tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around Max. Turns out they're only tough when they're picking on girls, Michael said. Liz, the ship was moving. It was leaving. Did you? Max said. Liz nodded. Remind me not to make you mad, Parker, Max said and kissed her. I guess Jimmy was wrong, Michael said. I'm sorry about your friend. Thank God, Liz thought. The others, Liz said. Maria and Isabel are fine. They're back at the diner, Michael said. Kyle was with us, but Max said. He got into it with one of the aliens, but Kyle got him. He got banged up but said he was okay, Michael said. Liz felt her stomach fall. There was something wrong. She could feel it. Kyle, she shouted. Nothing. Then Liz and Michael repeated it, calling for their friend. Come on, Max said, running with Michael right behind him. Liz followed for a few seconds, then she saw the figure lying on the ground. Kyle, Max shouted. Kyle didn't respond. In fact, he wasn't moving at all. As Liz got closer, she saw the dark pool on the ground next to him. His hands were resting on his stomach, and he was completely still. Max's hands were glowing as he leaped the last few feet to their friend. Then he was on his knees. Oh my God, Liz said. No, please. Kyle was still. His chest was not moving. Max touched Kyle with one hand on his head and one on his stomach. Both hands were glowing brightly. He was standing strong. Max was fighting for Kyle. It was costing Max something, Liz realized. He was fighting with everything he had. The pool around Kyle was starting to disappear, but the effort was etched across Max's face. He was still fighting, but Liz knew that not even Max could win all of his battles. In her vision, she had seen him lose in his final battle, and she knew that sometimes defeat was not a measure of how much you put into a fight. Some battles were just lost before they began, but not this one. Kyle coughed and sputtered and breathed. He coughed again, and then Max was helping him sit up. He got me good, Max, Kyle said, feeling his stomach. I thought I was. We thought you were too, Michael said. Good to have you back. You fixed me, Kyle said, looking at Max. Thanks again. Max nodded, and both guys looked away from each other, embarrassed by what they were feeling, by what all of us are feeling, Liz thought. Kyle looked around. Where is he? He asked. A few feet away, smoke rose from the ground. They investigated and saw a puddle of goo there. What did you do to him? Michael said. Kyle smiled. It's called a hit and rap. Michael glanced back at what was left of the alien and said, cool. We should go back. We found Dawn and Bill, Kyle. Jessica and one other too, Max said. A few seconds later, Max was looking over the girls. Jessica looked pretty bad, so he healed her first, then the others. Michael stayed next to him the whole time and then looked at him and said, Max, I say this as a friend, but you look like hell. He did, Liz realized. Max was covered in sweat. It felt cold to Liz's touch. The fight and then healing them all had taken a toll. Liz, get him back to the garage. Kyle and I will take care of them, Michael said. Max turned to Michael and said, Michael, trust me, Maxwell, he said. Max nodded and Liz put his arm around her shoulder. They started to walk into town. Michael still felt the rush from their fight with the aliens. During the battle, he had felt strong, alive. And as he had struck out at each of them, he had felt a moment of satisfaction. But that didn't bother him now. Whoever they were, the creatures were like pure malice. They were killing women, but not before they terrified and tortured them. It was kind of like what Agent Pierce had done to his best friend in a cold white room. The aliens saw people as lab rats. Well, today, the lab rats had fought back. There was justice there. Michael knew he would sleep without trouble tonight. But first, he had some things to take care of. Wait here, I'll carry them one at a time to the van, Michael said. Kyle had nodded and had not asked any questions. That was just as well. Michael had a lot to do and didn't want to waste any time. Once they were all safe in the van, he said to Kyle, wait with them. I'm going to get us some transportation. You're going to steal a car, aren't you? Kyle said. I'm just going to borrow something, Michael said. Kyle nodded. Just make sure it's big enough for all of them and try to keep it low profile. You bet, Michael said. Then he ran off into the night toward town. Kyle was surprised when he saw the headlights less than 20 minutes later. Michael had made good time. Town was at least a mile away. When the car came closer, Kyle realized there was something wrong with it. The dimensions were off and the taillights were too far back. What the, he thought. A minute later, the bus was close enough that Kyle saw why. That's low profile, he thought, shaking his head. The large, bright, yellow vehicle bounced slowly through the field and came to a stop next to the van. Michael jumped out and said, come on, let's get moving. You realize that's a school bus, right? Kyle said, taking Dawn in his arms and stepping towards it. Yeah, Michael said, picking up Jessica. Very subtle, Kyle noted. It's a long story, Michael said. Once the unconscious girls were in the bus, they quickly went back for the other two. Michael threw the bus into gear and headed into town. Michael's first stop was the diner. Maria and Isabel were waiting. Maria was awake and she didn't look happy. When he stepped out of the bus, she ran up to him and slapped him hard across the face. Then she hugged him tightly and kissed him. Women, Michael thought as he returned the kiss. Max and Liz were here. They told us what happened. Max woke Maria up. Dan is still out, Isabel said. Then she went to Kyle and said, Are you okay? Kyle nodded. Michael ran back into the bus and came out carrying Belle. He put her inside, laying her down next to her husband. Are you just going to leave them there, Isabel said. He shrugged. Unless you want to wait with them and explain what happened tonight. Then he softened his tone and said, look, they'll be together when they wake up. Can't be helped. You two go back to the garage. We will be right there, Michael said. What are you going to do? Isabel asked. Don't worry. I have everything under control, he said. Maria looked up at the school bus and said, I can see that. What? He said, annoyed. A school bus, Michael? She asked. Immediately, he felt the blood rushing to his face. Look, I needed something big enough that he stopped himself, shaking his head and said, oh, forget it. I'll see you later. A few minutes later, Michael laid Jessica and the other women down on benches in front of the laundromat. Why not leave them in the diner? They'd be safe there, Kyle said. It would raise too many questions, Michael said. This wave would also raise questions, but that couldn't be helped. When they were a few feet away, Michael picked up a rock and threw it straight at one of the laundromat's front windows. It shattered and a loud alarm sounded. A few seconds later, Michael and Kyle were inside the studio where the others were waiting. Max was sleeping next to Liz, who was awake and looking only at him. A glance at the clock gave Michael a surprise. It's only 11:30, he said aloud. How could that be? Had that whole thing played out in only a few hours? Michael told the others what he and Kyle had done. They could hear commotion in the town, then sirens. What are they going to make of tonight? Isabel said. I don't know, but there won't be anything to connect us to any of it, Michael said. That was important. The town would likely be crawling with state police tomorrow. Come on, space boy, let's get some sleep, Maria said. Michael got onto the floor next to her. She pulled him closer and Michael didn't question it. What's the point? It will probably all change tomorrow, he thought. Maria turned around and pulled him tightly against her. Michael stared at the back of her head as he held her. Well, it might all change tomorrow, but it was pretty good right now. Chapter 24. Someone was shaking him. Michael shrugged them off. They shook him again. What? Michael said, not even opening his eyes. Come on, you can walk us to work, Maria's voice said. That opened his eyes. Maria was glaring down at him. Of course she is, he thought. You have got to be kidding me, Michael said. We should, Max said. Michael looked up and saw his best friend looking down at him. Max looked better, almost like himself, almost. His eyes were a bit sunken, but he looked better than he had last night. We don't even know if the diner will be open, but we should not change our routine. We don't want any extra attention, Max said. Michael nodded. Max was right. The others were all up already. Michael showered quickly, and they were all out the door in minutes. As dead as the town had been before, it looked like Grand Central Station now. There were half a dozen police cars and people milling about everywhere on the street. It was chaos, but Max knew it was good chaos. Before, they had been watched from every window when they walked down the empty main street. Now they were barely noticed. Max was mildly surprised to see Belle and Sam in the diner. Belle smiled at them when they arrived. I'm so glad you kids are okay, she said. I thought you were on the road again. We had some more trouble with the van, Max said. Well, let's get you some food, Belle said. While they were all eating, Belle told them the incredible news. The night before, someone had broken into the diner after Max and his friends had gone. Belle was unclear on the details, but thought that she and Sam had been drugged. They had woken up feeling fine and had been checked out by the ambulance crew who had come for the girls who had showed up mysteriously in the laundromat. One of them was Jessica, Belle said, tears in her eyes. She looked fine except a little weak. It looked like she hadn't eaten in a while, Sam said, joining the conversation. Becky Taylor was there too. She went missing the same day that Jessica did, Belle said. It's a miracle, Sam said. Then when the food was finished, she and Sam disappeared back into the kitchen. Do you think they'll come back, Max? The aliens, Isabel asked. No, Max said. He couldn't say for sure why, but it felt like it was all over for Stonewall. Bullies don't like it when the prey fights back, Kyle said. Michael nodded his head, especially when the prey kicks their butt. Looks like we'll be staying here a little longer, Liz said. What about the van? Max asked Kyle. I'll have to check it out, Kyle said. Then he got up suddenly. That reminds me, I have to go see Dan before. I'll see you guys later, he said, heading for the door. Kyle got to the garage quickly. Someone was already inside the office. When he got closer, Kyle could see that it was Dan. He was sitting behind the desk and looked up at Kyle immediately. He was holding up the envelope Kyle had left him the night before. I didn't expect to see you, Dan said. Kyle shrugged. We were going to leave last night. What stopped you? Dan asked. For a second, Kyle was at a loss to explain. In the end, he said simply, the van broke down. It was the simplest explanation, and it was even partly true. Dan stared at him for a minute. Kyle finally said, look, Dan, if it's okay with you. Then something was sailing through the air at Kyle. His football reflexes kicked in, and he caught the keys in midair. Take the tow truck and bring her in. We'll take a look, Dan said. He handed him back the envelope and said, hang on to this. We'll settle up when you're ready to go. Thanks, Kyle said. They found her, you know. Dawn is okay, Dan said, the emotion clear on his face. I heard, Kyle said. I heard back in town. Heading out the door, Kyle climbed into the tow truck. Half an hour later, he had the van up on the lift. The garage was empty, so Dan came over to look at it with him. Spring snapped, Dan said, pointing to the metal coil near the left front tire. Could probably use some shocks, too. You know, you can improve the handling if you get a torsion bar. When my brother, Dan talked on for the longest he had since Kyle had met him. He told Kyle all about his brother's van and a little about the trip they'd taken. An hour later, the first car came in, then another. Then they were actually busy. They would be here a little longer. He would have had plenty of time to work on the van. That was good in a way. There was a lot more he wanted to do with it. She came back, Jimmy announced as he raced into the diner. Belle immediately wrapped her arms around him. We know, Jimmy, she said. To Liz's surprise, Sam came out from the kitchen and patted Jimmy on the back. It's a miracle, son, he said. Someone in the nearly full diner started clapping. Then everyone did. In seconds, the people from the town and the police who were eating were all on their feet applauding Jessica's return. Can I have the day off? Jimmy asked. Jessica's coming home from the hospital, he exclaimed, tears of excitement running down his face. Of course, dear, Belle said through her own tears. Okay, Jimmy said. When Jimmy finally disengaged himself from Belle, he turned to go. Then he caught Liz at the waitress station. I knew I remembered right. You saw her, didn't you? He asked, his innocent eyes full of gratitude. Jimmy kept his voice down. He had secrets of his own and obviously learned to keep them. You helped her, he said. It wasn't a question. Liz nodded. Jimmy wrapped his arms around her and held her silently for a minute. In that time, Liz had a flash. Jimmy and his sister were in a room. She couldn't be sure, but it felt like a new place. There was a game on the table in front of them. Jimmy was rolling dice and smiling as his sister watched him with a smile of her own on her face. Liz's own tears of relief, came freely, and she let them come. Throughout the day, Liz heard endless speculation about what had happened the night before. In the end, Liz knew it would remain a mystery. It was a story that had at least a partly happy ending and would keep the town talking for as long as it was there. She was amused that much of the speculation revolved around the school bus that had been found parked on Main Street. Though she knew that Max was still feeling the effects of the night before, he had insisted on continuing the painting job outside. When she went out to call Max, Michael, and Isabel in for lunch, she had heard what sounded like burping and then laughter. It had stopped when she called out, but all three of them were smiling when she saw them. That night, they headed back to the garage and settled down for the night. A few moments later, there was a knock at the door. Max answered it. Dan stood in the entrance. I just wanted to see if you kids were all right, he said. We're fine. Come on in, Liz said as she got up. Dan stepped inside and looked around as if he were seeing the place for the first time, or at least the first time in a long time. From what Kyle had told them, Liz thought she understood. We painted and spruced it up a bit. I hope that's okay, Isabel said. Fine, he said, his voice tight. It looks good. Dan glanced down at the playing cards in Michael's hands. Cards, he said. Yeah, you want to play? Kyle said. Please, Liz invited him. Dan plopped down on the floor against one of the beanbag chairs as if he had done it 1,000 times. Michael handed him the cards and said, Dealer's choice. Dan nodded and said, 7 cards. Follow the queen. Deuces wild. The others all shot him confused looks. Dan smiled. Pay attention, he said as he dealt the cards. A week later, they were saying their goodbyes. Bill had hugged each of them, and Sam had even shaken the boys' hands. A rare display for him, Kyle noted. They had already said his goodbyes to Dan, who was going to be in Pueblo for the day. It was just as well, better in fact, considering what Kyle was planning to do. Kyle hadn't seen Gomer or Dawn since the night she disappeared, but that was just as well. From what he had heard from Dan, neither of them remembered much about what had happened after they left the garage the night she was abducted. That being the case, Kyle figured she wouldn't have anything to say to him. Belle was giving Kyle and his friends a going away breakfast. It was the same food they had eaten since they had arrived, but there was a Bon Voyage banner and some balloons. As things wound down, Kyle got Isabel to one side and said, Can I borrow you for a few minutes? She looked at him questioningly but had nodded. We'll be right back, Kyle said. The van was parked outside the diner. It looked the same on the outside, but under the hood was a different story, Kyle noted with some pride. The diner, on the other hand, looked nice on the outside. Max, Isabel, and Michael had finished painting the exterior, and it seemed to shine now. Where are we? Isabel asked. Kyle raised his hand. Just come with me, he insisted, leading the way back to the garage. He led Isabel around back, showed her the van. This is the one that belonged to his brother, she asked. Yes, he said. He told her what he wanted her to do. When he was finished, she smiled. It's not very low profile, she said. No, he said, and Max would hate the idea. That's the problem with democracy, Isabel said. Not everybody gets what they want. You're in? Kyle asked. What do you want me to do first? She asked. They started on the structural work. There was real damage to the chassis and body in the back. Isabel straightened it all with a few touches, and the ancient injuries to the van seemed to mend themselves. A ruined van that had been rusting for 30 years came to life in front of him. It was amazing. No, she was amazing. Kyle found himself watching Isabel's face most of all. The simple joy it held was incredible. He got down on the ground and checked her work. The frame and bumper were straight now. Body panels were smooth. The rear doors opened easily. Even the tail lights looked new. Kyle showed her the rusted out frame on the side, and seconds later it was whole. They circled the van, smoothing dents and removing rust. Checking his watch, Kyle saw that they had been there almost about 10 minutes. They needed to hurry, or Max or the others would come looking for them. Opening the hood, Kyle showed Isabel the engine compartment and explained to her what the engine block was, what it did, and how it looked. It has a crack right there, Kyle said, pointing out. I don't know how far it runs. I think I can get it, Isabel said, touching it. That's it. There would still be plenty of work to do on the engine, Kyle thought. For one, it would need a new timing chain, but Dan was a mechanic, and something told Kyle he would enjoy this job. Opening the door, he took her inside, and she removed rust and fixed holes and tears in the upholstery. She made it all look new. And now the fun part, Kyle said when they got back outside. Isabel touched the side panel of the van and concentrated. It was like a wave of color washed over it. And then the psychedelic paint job looked like it must have when a teenager named Johnny had first applied it. Isabel took her hand off the van. When she was done, she smiled broadly and gave Kyle a quick, impulsive hug. Kyle took a moment to look at the van. The tires were missing, and it still sat on cinder blocks. Otherwise, it looked like it must have 30-some years before when Dan and his big brother had set out on the road with a group of friends to see a rock and roll show. Let's go before Dan comes looking, Isabel said, and they left, heading towards Main Street and their own friends. Liz watched Max as he pulled away from the diner. Belle was waving frantically. Liz waved back. In seconds, they passed the garage, then the hill where the alien ship had sat. From there, it was just open road. The van sounds good, Kyle. Actually, it sounds great, Michael said. Kyle smiled. Thanks, I had some extra time. We really did something back there, Liz said. The others nodded. They all felt it. They'd helped Jimmy and others they didn't even know. I know what you mean. You should have seen the way the paint was peeling on the diner. We got there just in time, Michael said. Liz heard a smack and Michael say, "Ow!" She smiled and then found herself getting thoughtful. "What do you think they wanted?" she asked. No one answered for a long moment. Finally, Maria said, "That's just one mystery we may never solve, Velma." "What did you call me?" Liz said, whipping her head around. "Like you're not completely Velma," Maria teased. "If anybody's Daphne, it's me," Liz said defiantly. "You've got, hold on," Max said. He smiled. "Are you telling me that all girls see themselves as either Daphne or Velma?" "Well, yeah," Liz and Maria said in unison. "See, you're either the hot one with a cute boyfriend or the smart one in the bad orange sweater," Maria said. "I don't know. I like Velma," Max said seriously. "You're kidding me," Liz replied. "Yeah, smart girls are hot," he said. "Besides, do you realize what a killer body she has under that sweater?" Max said. Liz laughed out loud, saying, "I didn't realize you watched so closely." "I'm only human, at least only half human," Max corrected himself. Everyone laughed at that, Liz noticed, even Isabel, which Liz was glad to see. There was more laughter and lots to talk about nothing. Though she wouldn't remember a single thing that she and her friends discussed, Liz knew she would remember that morning for a long time.
That's the end of A New Beginning.
The end.
Yay.